I had a conversation with the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. He joined me for This Week on Capitol Hill. We discussed what's been unfolding in the Middle East. Among the topics we discussed was Iran, the end of August deadline that was agreed upon by the U.S., France, Germany, and the U.K. And I wanted to share a part of that conversation with you right now. Here's how that conversation started. All right, let's talk Iran. According to recent reports, Iran has been given the end of August as a deadline to agree to a nuclear deal with the United States and our allies. However, Iranian officials have preconditions that they've set for these nuclear talks with the U.S. based upon no future military attacks by the U.S. First, are they in a position to make such a demand? And second, what should be the response of the Trump administration?
Well, they're really not in a position to demand much of anything. Thanks to Israel, their air defenses are essentially completely flattened. They've obviously suffered significant damage to both the nuclear program and their ballistic missile program. And I think they've shown their real sentiments in the past week or 10 days by effectively making it impossible for international inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to stay in Iran. The regime said we can't guarantee your safety, and the IAEA took the hint and said they were going to withdraw their personnel. I think what this reflects is that the Ayatollahs still want nuclear weapons, and the question is whether they can bluff us out of surveillance over their nuclear sites to make sure that they can't rebuild from the damage that's been done to them. This regime has never modified its radical theology that came into power back in 1979. It's still run by that same ideology, which is why it's a threat to the U.S., to Israel, to Arab governments in the region.
So what is the U.S. threatening if the Iranian regime fails to pursue or fails to engage in these talks and cease their pursuit of a nuclear weapon?
Well, because the 2015 Iran nuclear deal is now coming to an end, it was basically a 10-year deal in most significant respects. There's a provision in there that allows the UN Security Council to reimpose international sanctions that the 2015 deal lifted. Now, of course, the U.S. twice now in Trump administrations has reimposed those sanctions, but the Europeans have not. So this is a threat really from the Europeans that if the Iranians don't get serious, they will reimpose sanctions, which I think would be an entirely good thing, because that would show even more pressure, more unity among Western nations against Iran's effort to get nuclear weapon. But I don't think it will dissuade the Iranians. I think the benefit to the United States is to finally bring the Europeans over to a stronger position against this very threatening regime in Tehran.
So, Ambassador Bolton, that brings in kind of another component of this conversation. The U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities was a clear display of U.S. military strength and power. While not as immediate in its effect, the use of economic tradecraft, sanctions, and tariffs are being used quite extensively by the Trump administration. Is that by design, and is the impact of that as strong as military action?
Well, it's not as strong as it could be. Economic sanctions and tariffs and a variety of other things the U.S. could do are a form of warfare, economic warfare, not kinetic warfare. But I have to say our record of enforcing sanctions across many administrations for decades now has not been as effective as it could be. I think if we were to have stricter enforcement, the sanctions would bite harder and would therefore be more effective. And the whole point of using economic measures first is to try and avoid having to go to military action. So stronger sanctions, better enforced, I think are very much in America's interest. And we ought to be looking at how to use the sanctions more effectively than we have.
So could this be, kind of tying our domestic issues that we oftentimes think are just domestic. For instance, the president having this dispute with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Chairman Powell. Is the U.S. interest rates and the policy pursued by the Fed, does that affect the president's ability to use this economic tradecraft when it comes to foreign policy?
Well, it certainly can. Let's take the tariffs as an example. I think most economists would say there's going to be a negative economic effect on the U.S. because of the tariffs. And ironically, I think the White House understands that, which is why they've been putting pressure on the Federal Reserve to reduce interest rates to offset a negative effect on the economy by lowering the rates to promote more opportunities for economic growth. And that's a view that's shared by economists who think that the Fed ought to act early to prevent a larger negative impact that might occur as these tariffs finally take hold in the second half of this year. Tariffs are really just as much an international as they are a domestic issue, as your question really tries to probe on this interest rate issue.
30 seconds left, Ambassador. Is there a cohesive policy being pursued by the Trump administration on this front?
Well, I wish it were more cohesive. The world is a complicated place. A lot happens at the same time, and you have to try and maximize your effectiveness really across the board. We've not, with sanctions, for example, on Russia in the case of Ukraine. Maybe that's about to change. I certainly hope so.
All right, Ambassador John Bolton, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks again for having me.